commander-in-chief is that credibility matters more than truth. It has been more useful to him to be believed than to be honest. Consider his years of shifting from one foot to the other when asked about Vladimir Putin.
What exactly is your relationship with Vladimir Putin?
I have no relationship with Putin. I have no relationship with Putin.
Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin, a conversational relationship?
I do have a relationship, and I can tell you that he's very interested in what we're doing here today.
Never spoken to him. I don't know anything about him other than he will respect me.
I spoke indirectly and directly with President Putin, who could not have been nicer. I don't know Putin. I have no idea. I never met Putin.
Trump is in a whole different category. Trump says something almost every day that you raise an eyebrow and say, that's not quite true.
Paul Farhi was a long-time political reporter for the Washington Post and is now their media correspondent. Trump has hijacked the term fake news, he says, to create his own reality.
Yes, and fake news used to be stuff that was just patently made up. It wasn't stuff that you disputed, it was stuff that you knew was made up out of whole cloth and done so for entertainment or whatever reason. Now, fake news has come to mean anything I don't like and anything that trespasses across whatever my policy might be.
Do you think Trump himself had something to do with that?
Oh, I think Trump is the originator of that. I think Trump popularized this and has, tried to throw all kinds of doubt into the news media, and because the news media holds him accountable, and he's not too happy about that. Well, the danger in that is that there is no baseline of fact. There's only the news or the information that the government and the president wants you to believe. What he's doing is to undermine the credibility of news organizations and attempt to substitute his own judgment and only his judgment in our place.
Facing a joint session of Congress last week, Trump backed up his own version of reality by saying things that were untrue or deliberately out of context. Even though the economy is strengthening and unemployment is low, Trump painted a dark picture of widespread joblessness by decontextualizing a real statistic.
94 million Americans are out of the labor force.
That number, 94 million, includes everyone not working. But subtract from it all the retired people, all the students over the age of 16, the disabled, and those who choose not to work, and you're left with only about 9.5 million who are genuinely jobless and would like to be working. A number that falls within the range of what's considered healthy unemployment.
We strongly support NATO.
When talking about the North Atlantic Defense Alliance, he sounded as though he pressured America's allies to put more cash into NATO.
Based on our very strong and frank discussions, they are beginning to do just that. In fact, I can tell you the money is pouring in. Very nice.
Not true. There's been no increase in defense spending among NATO members since Trump's presidency, and even if there had been, the money wouldn't be pouring into NATO right away, or maybe even ever. In spite of those and other unrealities, some in the media judged Trump's performance his most presidential ever, while Trump insists the dishonest people are the media.
It's so important to the public to get an honest press. The public doesn't believe you people anymore. Now, maybe I had something to do with that. I don't know.
And I want you all to know that we are fighting.
Reporters, editors, and their bosses debate whether and when to call the president a liar. The New York Times has done it. The Washington Post has not.
I think it is necessary to call it a falsehood, to point out the correct facts. We don't know what's in the president's head when he speaks. Technically, to be a lie, you have to know that the person knows that they're speaking inaccurately.
That introduces the more worrisome possibility that Trump believes what he says. Questions about the president's state of mind are creeping into mainstream discussion. Carl Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein Watergate fame said publicly in January that even Republicans are talking about it.
Is exactly what has got Republicans in Washington on Capitol Hill worried about his pathology, to use their words. That they are worried about a delusional aspect that the president keeps seeming to go to.
Bernstein said Trump's disdain for facts surpassed even Richard Nixon. who resigned the presidency rather than face impeachment. After his fiery news conference a couple of weeks ago, CNN anchor Jake Tapper bluntly summed up Trump's behavior.
It was unhinged. It was wild.
That was only days after more than 30 psychiatrists wrote a letter published in the New York Times expressing their concern that the grave emotional instability indicated by Mr. Trump's speech and actions makes him incapable of serving safely as president. Some speculated Trump might have narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, which is described in the Manual of Disorders published by the American Psychiatric Association. That set off a discussion about whether it's ethical to have a discussion about Trump's mental health.
But this is the president. Why are we not creating a framework for the discussion of his mental health?
Lee Siegel, writing in the Columbia Journalism Review, argues journalists who avoid that question are betraying the public trust. He doesn't believe they need to wait for the approval of experts to consider the question legitimate.
To my mind, the evidence of his mental instability is within the realm of common sense.
He suggests this test.
To what extent do you share the same public perception of reality that other people do? To the extent that you don't, then you perhaps are mentally ill.
After his inauguration, Trump insisted that it had been witnessed by more than 1.5 million people on the National Mall. He instructed his press secretary to make the same case, even though it was obviously untrue. He has repeatedly claimed that massive voter fraud was the reason he didn't win the popular vote, and that his electoral college win was historic.
I guess it was the biggest electoral college win since Ronald Reagan.
No, it was in fact one of the smaller electoral college wins in history. Smaller than George H.W. Bush's, smaller than both of Bill Clinton's and both of Barack Obama's, all of whom were elected after Ronald Reagan. Whether that's mental illness is unknowable for now, but it's not the behavior we associate with the presidency. That might be what worries people such as Lee Siegel most. The normalization of abnormal behavior in the White House.
Because if you watched that news conference, that crazy news conference, and you said to yourself, well, this is Donald Trump, then you accepted it. But if you took a step back and said, this is the President of the United States talking, well, then you really would have been alarmed. And I think people see him as Trump, because he has imprinted himself on people's consciousness as this buffoon, as this performer who says anything and therefore can get away with, oh, that's the Donald, that's Trump. But no, now we have to see him as the president. His behavior is acceptable as who he is, of course, but it's not acceptable as who he has become, as the role that he is performing.
The psychiatrist who wrote the description of narcissistic personality disorder for the American Psychiatric Association sent his own letter to the Times saying Trump doesn't have it. He also said the antidote to a dystopic Trumpian dark age is political, not psychological. That's occurring to others, in particular to Democrats. Even in these early days of the Trump presidency, his untruthfulness and evasiveness about important matters has a few Democrats daring to speak of impeachment.
Because we are suspicious, many of us, about who he is, where he came from, what his actions are, and all of his conflicts, and what this business of loving Putin and the Kremlin so much, we have to find out more about him. And some of that, I think, leads to the possibility of impeachment.
What they don't have yet is a case or widespread, rock-solid public support. Without those things, even talking of impeachment is politically risky.
I'm saddened by the fact that we're talking about impeachment again. This is a very, very unfortunate thing. Impeachment, after all, undoes the democratic process of electing a president, which is at the center of our democracy.
Liz Holtzman was a Democratic member of Congress in the 1970s. She was among those who cast votes to impeach President Richard Nixon, and that led to his resignation.
Well, it was one of the most unpleasant things I had to do in my life. I was never a fan of Richard Nixon's. I was a Democrat. I opposed many of his policies, but he was my president.
The most important lesson she learned about impeachment was this.
Ultimately, it's going to be forced by the American people. I mean, we were inundated. I mean, there was no email in those days, but we were inundated. The American people triggered the impeachment process. of Richard Nixon.
The American people triggered the impeachment of Richard Nixon in large part because they believed and trusted the media's reporting about Watergate. This president has called his media critics the enemy of the people, and his supporters are inclined to believe that.
He's attacking the mainstream media because frankly, they're publishing a lot of fake news. What he's trying to do is basically destroy their credibility, and he has a good shot of doing it because at this point he's bigger than they are.
All the stuff about Russia and things like that, there's definitely fake news, and I believe it's organized to hurt Trump.
The shadow of Moscow seems to haunt President Trump.
All the stuff about Russia, Russia's attempts to influence the election, their meetings with Trump campaign staff, actually comes from national security and intelligence agencies. But Trump has disparaged them too. So far, in fact, he's been far more critical of the CIA, the FBI, CNN, and the New York Times than he has been of Vladimir Putin. That's an odd thing, and it's not fake news. Keith Oak, CBC News, Washington.
Well, now stay tuned for stories that are absolutely true.
I didn't think that someone coming from my background would be able to get into